Deep Space Nine is absolutely my favourite Star Trek show. In terms of storytelling, I don't think the franchise gets better than this. I'll admit that, yes, The Next Generation is the ratings juggernaut. The early seasons of Deep Space Nine are a bit slow. The same accusation can be levelled at The Next Generation. It's not until Worf arrives and Sisko's hair moves from his head down to his face that DS9 really explodes into life. But when it does, it's the most complex, grown-up and interesting Star Trek show there is. Does it achieve this by abandoning Gene Roddenberry's vision of the future? Maybe it does. I can live with it. For me, no other Star Trek comes close to the complexity of characters like Kira Nerys or Quark or Dax. Even Worf, who got some decent episodes on The Next Generation, I think gets much more character development on DS9. If you don't agree with me, think about the other Star Trek shows and how they have supposedly main characters that we learn very little about. How much did we ever get to really know about Chekhov or Uhura? What about Deanna Troi? Sure, she gets some good episodes later on, but personally it never quite makes up for wasting her in the early seasons. How about Ensign Mayweather in Enterprise, who we find out almost nothing about in 100 episodes? I guess you could say that Jake Sisko doesn't get a huge amount to do. I think child characters are always a bit difficult to deal with. But as for the others, you could pick any of them as outstanding or noticeable or highly subtle in comparison to other shows in the franchise. Kira Nerys might be my favourite character in all of Trek. There are so many layers to what's going on with her, and Nana Visitor is superb at bringing through all the different sides of her character. Miles O'Brien gets this whole new lease of life. I love how they use him to do all this domestic drama in the middle of the later seasons. How about Quark? The Ferengi were such a joke when they were first introduced on TNG. You have so much sympathy for them by the end of Deep Space Nine. I could say similar things about Bashir and Odo and so on. If you're still not convinced, beyond an above average main cast, there's a whole raft of secondary characters who are just as effective and memorable. Garak, Kai Wynn, Gul Dukat, Nog, General Martok, Weyoun. This is strength in depth that very little else in science fiction can touch. What is it that enables this focus on character? I guess it's two things. Firstly, you have Odo, Quark and Kira Nerys, who are not members of Starfleet and not even Federation citizens. In Emissary, their attitude towards Sisko and the Federation in general is, to say the least, ambivalent. Through the original cast and TNG, the universe has been presented from a Starfleet perspective. They've always been the good guys, and suddenly the Federation is just one of multiple points of view. It does a similar thing to what Stargate Universe controversially did a couple of decades later. Found a way to break the basic rules of the world, made it fresh and opened up new storytelling possibilities. Secondly, the move from a starship to a space station is also important. There's an old quote that there's only two plots. A stranger rides into town, or a man goes on a journey. Most of Star Trek is obviously the second of these. The problem with going to a new place every episode seems to be that you need to set up the new planet, the characters, work out who in the main cast is going to interact with them, what's going to be the twist. It's obviously successful, though it risks taking the focus off the main cast, reduces the time you can spend with them, and leads to juggling priorities that might, over time, exclude some characters. Deep Space Nine is all about the other one, the strangers riding into town. This means the non-regular characters, in many cases are still an integral part of the show, have to fit into the space station rather than the other way round. As a result, DS9 focuses more on its main cast rather than the alien of the week. This approach is barely noticeable over one episode, but pays massive dividends over a couple of hundred. Consider how much we know about Bajor versus Beta Z. Let's talk about the episode itself. The title is Emissary, which means a person sent as a diplomatic representative on a special mission. This is Commander Benjamin Sisko. It's a very Sisko-centric episode, and that's not meant in a negative or suffocating way. It's like the episode is woven around him, so he's either on screen with the reveal of the station, the local politics, the action and the dialogue, or he's off screen, but his lack of presence is what's driving the plot. There's a few scenes where this isn't true, like Dax thinking about her joining, or O'Brien and Picard saying goodbye. Overall, Emissary is focused on the main character and drives the plot forward as much as possible. It's a story that feels quite dynamic, quite kinetic most of the time, and this is true right from the beginning, where we open at the Battle of Wolf 359, back at the end of TNG Season 3. Sisko sees Picard as Locutus. We see a Borg cube fire at Sisko's ship, forcing an evacuation. Sisko manages to get out, along with his child, but his wife doesn't make it. I love the shot as the shuttle pod is ejected from the ship, with Sisko's miserable face a huge contrast with the feeling of force as the pod flies out into space. This is going to be an event he returns to later in the episode. For now, we skip forward to 3 years later, and Sisko and his son Jake are arriving at Deep Space Nine. He spends some time down on the station, and then Sisko's presence is requested on the Enterprise, so he can receive his orders from Picard, a man he's only ever encountered as Locutus. The commander seems to be procrastinating about this meeting. He keeps putting it off, which is perhaps understandable. Once they do meet, Sisko takes a very aggressive tone, and this is the only bit of the episode that still doesn't sit quite right. Is Avery Brooks overacting here, or is he setting the tone for the character? It's a bit weird to go so hard on Picard. Sisko's opening comment is that they've met before, by which he means as Locutus at the Battle of Wolf 359. Then he goes on to explain that he's not interested in the job and can Picard find someone else to do it. I guess you could argue it's the shock of being confronted with the face of the Borg. To be fair, Picard is and will remain the face of the Borg for many people. Another version of Sisko's reaction was seen in Picard Season 3, much later in the timeline than this, with Captain Shaw, another veteran of Wolf 359 and wary of Picard, at least at first. Shaw's reaction is a bit more professional, a bit more, so I'm not crazy about the acting choice by Avery Brooks here, but it passes quick enough, so I guess I can forget about it, just let it go. Picard also absorbs the reaction quickly enough. I guess it might not be the first time it's happened for him, and we know it's not the last, and he outlines Sisko's mission. First, help the Bajorans get back on their feet after the Cardassian occupation, then do everything he can to get them in the Federation, and lastly, at Sisko's request, he will look into a replacement. So that is the first sense in which Sisko is an emissary, as a Starfleet officer with a diplomatic mission to fulfill. The other sense is the more long-term version, the Bajoran meaning. After first arriving at the station, before he meets Picard, Sisko is walking through the promenade, surveying the chaos the Cardassians have left behind, in terms of both infrastructure and people. He meets his first officer, Nerys, a Bajoran who at this point sees the Federation as an occupying force little better than the Cardassians, and is more concerned with the expected and imminent collapse of the Bajoran government. Sisko also gets approached by a Bajoran monk who tells him the profits await you, and like with Picard, Sisko decides he's going to delay the meeting. We also meet Quark, his nephew Nog, and I guess this sequence is where we get introduced to the idea of the station as a character. I'll cover all of these threads during the video. I'll stay with the religious stuff for now. Honestly, it's really impressive just how dense and efficient this episode is at setting up all these different story threads, though I kind of have to pull it all apart and look at the different pieces separately. After the monk approaches him a second time, after the meeting with Picard, Sisko goes down to Bajor to meet Opaka, the spiritual leader of the planet. After the monk's cryptic comment earlier, Opaka piles on the weirdness, both verbally and by grabbing his ear. Then gives him what she calls the tear of the prophet, a giant shiny orb that gives Sisko a vision of the day he met his wife, just after he graduated Starfleet Academy. Opaka explains there are 9 orbs which have appeared over the last 10,000 years, most of which have been stolen by the Cardassians. The Bajorans believe the orbs have been sent from a place called the Celestial Temple, and Opaka gives Sisko the task of finding this temple for his own par, for his destiny. Sisko agrees to take on the job. I guess this fits with his diplomatic mission he's been tasked with, so he assigns the technical details of finding the temple to Lieutenant Dax. Dax is a Trill who knew Sisko in her previous incarnation as an old man, so that becomes her nickname. She doesn't get much to do in the pilot. I guess the concept of a centuries-old worm that carries memories of multiple lifetimes is enough for one episode. So Dax gets to work on finding the Celestial Temple. She's not the only one. Just after the Enterprise leaves, a Cardassian ship arrives at the station, and the commander, Gul Dukat, requests to come aboard. Gul Dukat is one of those excellent secondary characters that other Star Trek shows don't quite manage to produce in such large quantities as Deep Space Nine does. He's clearly a total scumbag, and yet totally compelling. His relationship with Kira, in particular, clearly messes with both of their heads to a significant degree. He's contemptuous of the Bajorans, and yet desperate for their approval. Dukat is a character there wouldn't be much space for in other shows. That's not a criticism of Dukat. That's a criticism of the other shows. He's the former commander of Deep Space Nine. He verbally spars with Sisko in his former office that now belongs to the Federation commander. Sisko, Dukat says, is far from the Federation fleet, alone. The station is a remote outpost. The Cardassians, on the other hand, will be quick to respond if help is needed. After the introductory general intimidation is over, he moves on to his more specific request. He knows that Sisko has been to see Opaka, he knows he has an orb, and he proposes an information exchange. Neither the Federation or the Bajoran staff are interested in Dukat's idea. And when Dax identifies a location for the Celestial Temple that she thinks is worth a look, they realise they're going to have to get rid of the Cardassians before they check it out. Here, I will loop back round to Sisko's initial arrival at the station, where he met Kira, the Bajoran monk, Quark, Nog, and we saw what a bad state the station was in. I've followed the Bajoran monk thread. This time, I want to talk about Quark and Nog, because Quark is crucial in foiling the Cardassians' plans to find the Celestial Temple. As Kira and Sisko discuss the poor state of the station, they come across a pair of thieves, and Sisko captures one of them, a Ferengi named Nog. Nog's uncle, Quark, runs a bar on the station promenade, but is planning to leave the next day, mainly because of the political instability down on the planet. To stop him doing this, Sisko throws Nog in prison and says he wants something from Quark: to stay on the station, to be a community leader. This is how different Deep Space Nine is compared to other Star Trek series. In order to get what he wants, the commanding officer throws a child in prison for the greater good. It's a very bold change. It crosses a line that I don't think Kirk or Picard ever would. It's fuel for the idea that Deep Space Nine doesn't just test the boundaries of what Star Trek is, it breaks them. For me, I don't think it quite does that. Nog is guilty after all. He's caught red-handed. I think that's enough of a cover. There's enough justification that while it is manipulative, it's also basically truthful. After all, Quark is only on the receiving end of behaviour he deals in himself. It's dealing with the Ferengi in an appropriate manner, perhaps. Federation citizens and Ferengi behave differently. So maybe they should be treated differently as well, unless you believe that the blank slate theory even applies to aliens. Let's get back to the plot. I mentioned Quark in relation to the Cardassians because Gul Dukat, when chatting to Sisko, asks if his crew are welcome to hang around the station, and the Cardassians end up gambling in Quark's bar, which is open and busy, much to Sisko's delight. And Quark is essential in holding back the Cardassians, because through his manipulation, the Cardis end up with technical problems on their ship, and they can't follow Sisko and Dax as they leave in a runabout to find the Celestial Temple. This conspiracy to sabotage the Cardassian ship involves multiple people, including the Starfleet and Bajoran staff. The Starfleet staff are under Sisko's orders, and the Bajorans are presumably motivated to find the Celestial Temple as per Kai Opaka's request. If the Cardassians know that Sisko and Opaka have spoken, presumably the Bajorans do too, and that gets them buying into the plan. The security officer Odo, who does the actual sabotage himself, is a curious case. He was found in the area that Dax is going to investigate, so I guess his personal curiosity outweighs any concerns about damaging the Cardassian ship. Quark, as owner of the bar, provides the venue. The guy is clearly choosing a side here, although somewhat under duress, as his nephew is still in prison. It's a good early example of the characters working together, and I guess it's believable because at the end of the day, no one likes the Cardassians. With the ship damaged, Dax and Sisko get away and make it to the wormhole, where we get the resolution of the episode. All the stuff we get with the wormhole aliens. Sisko has to explain the nature of linear time. He has to confront what happened at Wolf 359, while the aliens take on avatars of people he knows. Does this sequence go on a little bit too long? I feel it maybe goes on a little bit too long. It's the one part of the episode that's maybe a little bit inaccessible for the casual viewer. I like how it builds up, how he has to explain the concepts of past, present, and future. They slowly understand him and they lead him towards the contradiction that while he moves into the future, psychologically there's a point in time that he's stuck in when he lost his wife. There's maybe a little bit too much time with Jennifer early on. I think that could have been edited down a bit, maybe in favour of some more character work, for example, like for Odo or Bashir, who don't get so much to do in this episode. The more conventional story is going on back at the station. Once the Cardassians get their ship working again, it's a race to follow Sisko and Dax into the freshly appeared wormhole, with Dukat in charge on one side and Kira leading on the station. Like I mentioned at the start, Sisko's not there, but the plot is about his absence. One last time, I will loop back round to Sisko's initial arrival at the station, where he met Kira, the Bajoran monk, Quark, Nog, and we saw what a bad state the station was in. I've talked about the Bajoran monk, I've talked about Quark a bit. Let's talk about the station as a character on the show. It's obviously a huge contrast to the Enterprise, both inside and out. The Cardassians seem to have done their best to leave it in as bad a state as possible, with the promenade serving as our demonstration of this. A chaotic backdrop to meeting Nog and Odo and Quark. On top of the temporary mess, it's a Cardassian station with significant amounts of Bajoran technology, and the Federation has brought their own equipment as well. So the station functions, technically, in that people can live on it. It's a ramshackle, stitched-together compromise. It's not the clean, bright, and purpose-designed flagship of the Federation fleet. Deep Space Nine, the station, is a good fit for Deep Space Nine, the show, because it lets you know that things here are going to be messy and noisy and sometimes uncomfortable. I talk about the station here because in the race to catch up with Sisko and Dax, the Cardassians have got ships. Kira's got the entire station, so her response is to ask Chief O'Brien to move the whole of Deep Space Nine to the wormhole while calling the Federation for backup. And it turns out that moving the station, currently in orbit around Bajor, is possible, it turns out, only with improvisation and with O'Brien explaining to the computer which of the two of them is actually the boss. So both parties end up outside the wormhole, which is apparently closed to new visitors after Dukat has taken his ship inside. I really like this sequence as further setup for the station, specifically how O'Brien gets really manipulative with how the station will appear when the Cardassians scan it. Star Trek is obviously famous for the technobabble. When the crew has an apparently unsolvable problem, just say some science words and it all goes away. What they do here, what Kira and O'Brien do, is a bit different. They're not confronting the problem head on, but they're being sneaky, they're being deceptive. I'm sure there's plenty of examples in TNG of Picard and others being similarly deceptive, but going down this route in the pilot really sets the groundwork that these characters will do whatever they feel is necessary. They don't always need the moral high ground. Just as things are looking really dire for the people on the station, Sisko emerges from the wormhole, towing behind him a humiliated Gul Dukat. He has successfully negotiated an agreement with the wormhole aliens, or as the Bajorans view them, the prophets. They'll have ongoing access to the wormhole with its stable connection to the Gamma Quadrant, 70,000 light years away, all of the potential for exploration, commerce, and diplomacy. As for Sisko, his experience in the wormhole has made him a changed man. Once the Enterprise returns, his attitude towards Picard is much different, and he asks to remain as station commander. And that is Emissary, the pilot episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I think it's a great episode, both as setup for the series and on its own merits. The Next Generation pilot, Encounter at Farpoint, is great setup for the series, but it's nowhere near as good as this as a standalone story. Partly what makes Emissary better for me is you can see the potential for future storylines. Encounter at Farpoint gets the gang together, there's some good interactions, there's the looming threat of Q, but that's about it. In Emissary, we see the Cardassians still have interest in Bajor and will aggressively promote those interests. Kira and O'Brien realise they both have prior experience of dealing with the Cardassians and work together to outwit them. There's the wormhole, the aliens inside it, whatever they might find in the Gamma Quadrant beyond it. There's the mystery of Odo's origins, found in the same area the wormhole was. There's the political instability on Bajor. There's the weird way Sisko got treated by the monk and Opaka, both of whom seem to be expecting him. There's Quark, clearly a Ferengi in the same mould as on TNG, with all the negatives that implies, but informally used by the Federation and Bajor as an important feature of the station because they need civilians to make the place work. There's Dax and Sisko and the whole thing with Curzon and their previous friendship. There's the wonderfully naive Julian Bashir talking about frontier medicine and this is where heroes are made. Absolutely enraging Kira. And there's Kira. A Starfleet officer wouldn't be able to behave the way she does, but it's really freeing to see a main Star Trek character, actually I'd include Quark in this as well, to see main characters in Star Trek behaving in emotional, selfish, more human ways. Do I think this is the best Star Trek pilot? The wormhole stuff, maybe the special effects look a bit strange there. It's a bit Lawnmower Man when they're inside the shuttlecraft, and I wonder if the concept is a bit high level, though I do feel I'm kind of looking for things to complain about. It's kind of between this and Enterprise for the best pilot episodes. The special effects in Broken Bow are noticeably better, but that's more about when they were made than anything else. There's so much potential for things to happen in Deep Space Nine. Yes, the other Star Trek shows have a blank slate to do whatever they want every episode. While travel is great, staying in the same place can be a much richer and deeper experience. Of all Star Trek, this is the show I can't stop thinking about, the one that I want to rewatch the most. Thanks for watching.